Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are going to get started in just a few moments. My name is Ariel Nissenblatt, and I'm the community manager at SquadCast. Please let me know if you can hear me loud and clear and if everything is sounding good. I'm bringing Jacci up onto the stage. Jacci, we are live now. We were in the green room before.
Hey, everyone. It's awesome to be here and finish out the week with you all.
Pumped.
And
Kim.
hopefully we can figure out how to present this.
Yes, we were having a little bit of technical difficulty behind the scenes, so we're going to try our best, and our best might be good enough, and we're just going to hope for that. Loud and clear. Okay. Awesome.
Oh, wow.
So
I love the interactivity. This is great.
I know. Isn't it fun? This is a great platform.
Yes.
So while we're still gathering some folks, let me make some announcements. Again, my name's Ariel. For those just joining us, SquadCast Community Manager. We are a remote content production platform that helps podcasters and content creators record video and audio in studio quality. You can find more information at squadcast.fm. That is our website. And Kim Reyes is in the chat. She's our marketing manager, and she is going to be peppering the chat with some links throughout. So if you have any questions about SquadCast, Kim is there to help you out. Some more housekeeping. If you look at your screen on the bottom, you will see a button that says ask a question. If you have any questions, that is a great place to ask your questions. At the end of our presentation, in about 50 minutes from now, we're going to go to Q&A, although up to Jacci if you want to take questions throughout or kind of intermittently. And then another thing is that we have a poll going right now. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's call to action, ask a question, polls, polls. And so your polls over there, we have a question going on right now. Thoughts. My show notes could be improved. So we want to know, do you think that your show notes could use improvement? And obviously Jacci's here to help with that. So go ahead and put your answer over there. And anything else? Some other notes. Podcast Movement is coming up. Podcast Movement is going to be in Nashville this year from August 3 through 6. If you are a Squadcaster, we are having an event. We're hosting breakfast for Squadcasters on August 4th from 8 to 9:15 a.m. at American Cascades Cafe. We'd love to have you there. If you want more information, please feel free to send me an email, ariel@squadcast.fm. I can send you information or just repeat what I said in text. If you're interested in joining the SquadCast community, we would love to have you. That's the part of SquadCast that puts on events like this. If you're a Squadcaster and you want to join a community that has all of these events and also other opportunities to network and meet other podcasters, we'd love to have you. Kim, if you could put the application link in our chat, that would be great. Our application link to the Squad Pod community. And if you are a Squad Podder who is currently joining us, we'd love to hear from you. Just say hello in the chat. And with that, I think we'll get started. I'm going to introduce Jacci Schiff. Jacci is here joining us from Podreacher. Podreacher is an incredible company that helps us write our blogs. So Jacci, do you want to just give a little introduction? Who are you? What is Podreacher? And then we'll get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thanks everyone for joining. On your Friday, I know there's a lot of different things you can be doing, and I really want this to be as helpful as possible for all of you. So as I always call you Ariel. Maybe
it's okay. It's okay. I say Ariel, but it does not matter. Please.
Ariel. Okay. So as Ariel mentioned, I'm Jacci Schiff, or for SEO purposes, Jacqueline Schiff. But I'm the CEO of Podreacher, and we are a specialized content agency that works with B2B podcasts to help create all different types of content assets, including show notes. And today, that's what we're going to talk about. I'm always looking at show notes, see a lot of different types of show notes, and have pulled out a few things that are designed for you at home to be very easy to implement, that can hopefully differentiate your show notes, make them a little more interesting. Before I start, though, I did want to ask a question. I don't know if it's easy to respond in chat or if we should put up a poll.
I could do the poll. Let's do the poll.
So I'm curious, like, of the people who are here, who have joined, would you say, like, is your podcast, are you creating a podcast for a brand, or is this like a side hustle, your own project, something you hope to monetize one day? So I guess I would group it into two things. Is it branded, like is it part of something you do for your day job, or something outside of that?
Okay, I just put the poll in the chat, so we'd love to hear from you. Just want to address a question that we got. So Alistair asked if he could post an episode link in the group for feedback. We're going to say no on that for now, but if you are a Squadcaster and you want to get feedback on your podcast, click on the link that Zach sent. He sent a link to our Squad Pod community forum, and we do events like that all the time. We do a lot of feedback sessions, so please feel free to join us. So Jackie, we're getting some answers already.
I know.
It looks like almost 50-50 at this point.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting to see. I like the interface, how it like updates real time. Okay, so I try to I'm going to reference a couple of examples throughout this, and there's a mix. Some branded shows, some not. But I think regardless of your podcast, these are ideas and thoughts that can be applied. So I do have some slides, and this is where the technical difficulties came in. So okay. I guess Ariel's going to share her screen.
We're going to try our best over here.
Okay, yeah.
That's not it. Sorry,
okay.
It's so scary.
Oh.
Okay, that's not it. It didn't work. Okay, so
okay.
Jackie, I think it might be best if you share your screen, because that worked before.
Okay, it did work.
And I'll just help you out with however I can help you.
Okay.
If you want to send me your notes.
Share screen. Okay. Entire screen. This is terrifying. All right. You can see my screen?
Yes. Okay, it worked.
Okay.
We love Canva.
Okay. Now what are you seeing?
Now we are seeing just a smaller version of the presentation.
Okay.
So I think if you expand it, it'll work.
So now,
now we're seeing it, but it's smaller.
Okay.
I mean, we can see it completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you make that big, yep, that's it.
Okay. I'm just trying to think. Sorry. I will.
No worries.
I will be with you. Oh, you know what?
You have another.
I think I can pull this up on my phone. I just there's a couple of points that I want to not forget to hit on. So, give me 1 minute.
Okay, I'll entertain the troops in the meantime.
Yes.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about 8 ways to improve your podcast show notes. How many folks are currently spending time on their show notes? How much time do people spend on their show notes week to week? I know for me, for Between Two Mics, the SquadCast podcast, Zach, if you could drop a link, that would be lovely. I write some pretty extensive show notes, but they're definitely not optimized for search engine. They're really just summaries of what goes on in the episode. And so I'm curious to find out during this time from Jackie what really the best practices are. So definitely want to hear about that. What else are folks looking forward to learning in this session? Feel free to type it into the chat. I see some really great comments coming in. Some people are saying they spend 5 minutes. Some people spend an hour. Greg says too much because I'm getting started and getting my process down. That makes a lot of sense. And Luca wants to streamline the process. So let's tackle all that. Jackie, are you good to go?
I think so. I am going to just do this view, if that's okay.
Yeah, totally.
All right. So bear with me. There'll be good stuff here. I wish I was a little better off the cuff, but something I got to work on. All right. So thanks, Ariel, for warming people up, and thanks everyone for sticking around. So we're going to talk about 8 ways to improve your podcast show notes. But before we get to that, let's make sure we're talking about the same thing, right? What are podcast show notes? And I'm going to pull up a tweet that I did, a very unscientific poll, because I knew what I thought about when I thought about show notes, and I thought it was pretty intuitive and everyone thinks of it as the same thing. But actually, that's not the case. So in this unscientific poll where I asked people on Twitter, what do show notes mean to you? You can see that people were pretty split. And in fact, 50% of the people who responded here said it's the content in a podcast app, right? So the thing you would see, the episode description. And then, slightly under 40% said it's the content on a podcast website, which is personally what I think of when I think of podcast show notes. So, and like, just to be clear, so a description, when you pull it up on your phone, it's kind of the preview what the episode is about. So today, what I'm going to focus on is the content that would go on a podcast episode website. For an episode description and how to handle that, there's an excellent article from, I think it's from Dan Misner at Pacific Content. And I can find the link later, to send out an email. But in terms of how long your description should be, what should be included, it's really an excellent guidepost. So I'd recommend reading that when thinking about episode descriptions. But for today, we're going to talk about show notes that would be on a web page, or Adrian, and I forget his last name. He's corrected me on Twitter a few times, or I should say enlightened me, on Twitter a couple times. And, he calls it episode notes, which I think is technically more accurate. But so that's what we're talking about. Okay, so first things first, is you want to determine, and are you seeing the animation?
Yes, goals.
Yeah, is it animated?
No, it's not moving. So sad.
This is so sad. I really
and we can see your notes. I don't know if that's terrible.
Yeah, it is kind of
I think it's okay. I think transparency is lovely. We can look at it that way.
Let's see if I can narrow this in. Well, and it's just unfortunate because I did want you to see the animations. Let's see.
There it is.
Yeah, that's cute. That's much nicer. Okay. So goals. So now you're moving around. All right. So as we all know, right, creating a podcast takes a lot of work. And I think a lot of, this is a really fundamental question, but it gets neglected a lot, right? So why are you creating podcast show notes? What are your goals with them? And from where I sit and what I've seen with podcasts, I think there's kind of two ways to think about it. So first, are the show notes essentially a resource for your current listeners, right? Is it something for them to look at and decide, okay, which part of this episode is most relevant to me? So that's one way to think about them. Or, for a listener who, as we know, people are listening while they're out on the go, they're doing other things, and then they want to come back later and say, they mentioned this excellent resource. I want to be able to quickly identify what that is. So that's, and those are the kind of show notes that we're going to talk about primarily today. But I would say if your goal is marketing, so if you want your show notes to really bring new people to you, then you want to think about creating not your traditional show notes, but doing a full article based on the episode. And there's a couple different podcasts that do something like this. So I actually have a link to show you, but so for example, Nick Loper's Side Hustle Project does an awesome job with this, where, the episode page, so he will embed a player on the page, and then there's a 1,500 word article that really stands on its own as its own piece of content. We've also worked with a podcast that's for YouTube channel managers, and they take a similar approach. I'd actually love to drop it in the chat. Just an example. I can't find it.
Do you want me to? I can grab it. What is it? The side hustle?
Well, that's one of them. Let me see if I've got it here. Yeah. Oh, here, you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
So this is Pro Channel Manager, okay? And this is like an example. So he's really using his show notes as a way to, he was wanting to double down on SEO. So this page is optimized. The headline is probably different than what he would call the title. But then you'll see here, he's got this call out box, which is kind of more traditional show notes, where he's got the resources, linked to something you mentioned in the episode in the player. So someone could really get here through search. But so the point there is just to determine your goal. And so if you're marketing, I'd say you really want to go in the direction of turning these into articles. But there's a lot of things that can influence that. Not everyone has the time, resources, ability, and whatever. But if you're going the other route, think of these as a resource for your current listeners, and how you can make them as valuable as possible. So that's number one. So number two tip for making better show notes is to get creative with your titles. And I don't necessarily mean episode titles, although we can, cover that differently. What I'm talking about is, so on most show notes pages, you'll see like there's an episode summary. People will say something like key takeaways, and then, they might include something else like, guest information or something. You don't have to call it those things, right? You could come up with titles that are creative, interesting, and that are going to draw your target listener in, right? So, for example, let's say you're creating a podcast for software developers. Instead of calling it key takeaways, you might say something like the syntax, because that's like a terminology that's going to be more relevant to them. So don't feel restricted by what people typically do. You could go in a different direction. Another example, and I think I do have it here, is, so here's a podcast, the CFO Playbook, which, as you might guess, is for CFOs and people in finance. And so here, the guest, like the information about the guest, instead of saying guest information, they say guest analysis, because, for finance people, that's something that would resonate more. Or here's their key takeaways section. And what they're doing here is playing on the name of the podcast, the CFO Playbook, but then also saying, so making it specific to this episode from Maddie, and Maddie was the guest on this episode. So lots of different ways to be creative with the titles on your episode page. Number three, so another way you can differentiate, make your show notes a little more interesting, is to format the transcript. So a lot of people will develop a transcript, and, there's some people that love to read a transcript. These people are mysteries to me. I've never really read a transcript, but I do find it a very useful resource. And there's a lot of different, reasons to have a transcript on your episode page, particularly like from an accessibility perspective, right? Like, so if people are hard of hearing or have difficulties hearing, it makes the full podcast accessible to them. What I'd encourage you to do is, like, a transcript is just, it's a dense piece of text. How can you visually make it interesting, or help break it up and make it a little bit more meaningful for your reader, or reader listener, right? There's a lot of different ways to do this. I've seen, people get really creative. Like, you could highlight, excerpts in the transcript, or something that we do, and I think I have an example here, is, so we'll take the full transcript for some of the clients that we work with, and we'll take like 2 or 3 sentences, so like you can see on the screen, And, we clean up the language there and then put a summarizing, phrase or like a topic sentence above. So from an SEO perspective, that is helpful, right? Because it's a way to get keywords onto the page. But it also like signals, okay, this is what that part of the transcript is about. You could also put timestamps here. And have the timestamps link to the player so that people can actually, click on that and get to that part of the episode. So there's a lot of ways to encourage interactivity with the page just by breaking up the transcript and making it a little bit visually interesting. And it's not too hard to do, right? Especially if you outsource transcription to a service like SpeechPad or Rev if you're not like cleaning up the transcript yourself. Do we have any questions so far, by the way?
We do. You want to take some?
Let's see how we're doing on time. Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Take some. I'm going to actually just hide my screen for a minute, and then I'll hop on.
Okay, here is a question from George Coster.
Okay.
How are the podcasting apps looking at show notes like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google?
Sorry, because now you're getting my...
I think if you just X out for now and then you can reshare your screen later.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Sorry about that. So what was the question?
How are the podcasting apps looking at show notes like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google?
So, so I guess in the beginning we said, so that would be like thinking about your podcast episode description. I didn't want to, because it's very different on all the platforms, I didn't want to get into that, specifically today. But what I would say is I would point you to that, that Pacific content piece. The main thing to think about is all the different apps are going to cut off your description at different character limits. So that's something to be aware of. Some people will provide a different description based on the platform. But there's a lot of ways to think about that. I have seen podcasts that will put, the whole show notes. They'll put a summary of the episode. They'll even dump the transcript into that episode description. So it displays in the preview. When you're looking at it on your smartphone. I think from like a user experience and a listener experience, I don't think that's a good experience. Because when I'm looking through, personally, when I'm looking through on the app, I want to know what I'll learn from this episode. I don't want you to give me everything from the episode, right? Like I'm looking at that, trying to determine what I'm going to listen to. So I would say when you're writing the description for an app, you want to think about, how can I get someone to want to listen to this episode? So hopefully that helps.
Awesome. Do you want to take another question or do you want to move on for now?
You let me know.
Let's do a question real quick.
Okay.
Should you max out the show notes? Should you max out the notes that show up in Apple Podcasts or other platforms, or keep it simple and to the point for websites for more extensive show notes with links and trans?
So I think we addressed that, right? I would keep it more digestible. I wouldn't put the whole thing in the episode description. Was there a part of that question I was missing?
I don't think so. Rebecca, let us know if that helped. I think a big thing that we need to determine here is that show notes don't always equal descriptions. Would you say that's right?
Yeah. So what I'm, talking about today is like what would be on a website, on a web page with your episode. And I would say an excerpt of that should absolutely be, included in your description, but not necessarily the whole thing.
So, yeah, I think she simplified her question a bit. Should you include links in your episode descriptions?
So my understanding is that different apps will treat links differently. So they might get stripped. So I'm in favor of putting a link to your episode page or back to your podcast website. I wouldn't necessarily include links that, are like would be a source or something like that. So I'd say, quick answer would be minimize links and bring people back to your website.
That makes sense.
Is there an SEO benefit for her? Sorry, okay.
Yeah, you saw the question. You want to get to it later?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, yeah. We'll come back to you, Alistair, promise. Hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Alistair? Anyway, continue, Jackie.
Okay, so I am back to presenting. Oh, wait, I have to reshare my screen. Okay. All right. Ooh, I love that. This is such fire content. Great. Yeah. I really want to be helpful to you guys. And I want to make sure we have time for questions. So, oh no, now you're seeing the wrong thing. Damn it. Okay, let's try again. You got it. All right. Okay, so tip number 4. Don't be afraid to use emojis. So the reason I say this is emojis have really become like a short form way to inject a little bit of personality and include tone. Recently, Adobe came out with a really interesting study that talked about the value of emojis for marketing. And one of the findings is that people that use emojis when they text, when they write, when they email, are highly likely to respond to like an email with an emoji, content with emojis. It just makes it a little more engaging. And, especially for a show notes page, which, we were just talking about a transcript and other things you might include. There's so much text to include. Emojis are a really easy and low budget way to break it up. And I have a cool example. So this is Jenny Blake's podcast, Free Time. And I love the way she does it on her pages. So you can see, right, like over here, she doesn't have like a huge show notes page, but she is, like for resources, she's got a little link, books mentioned. And it's just a really nice way, I think, to format the page on an episode website. So don't be afraid of emojis. Sometimes also, I think there's this idea that, emojis are just for kids or something or college students. And what I would, urge you is to encourage you not to think that way and just realize that it's a way of putting some personality and tone into your writing. All right, next tip. Okay. So create digestible guest bios. So if you're doing an interview show, part of your process might be that you ask your guests, give us your bio. And I hate to break it to you, but a lot of people have, bios that are not very well written, right? Sometimes they go on really long. Sometimes they're really short and unclear. But there's a lot of, problems with bios. And even if they are well written, the way one person writes their bio is different to the way another person writes their bio. What I would say is a good way to make this not be a messy part of your show notes page is to format the bio and maybe use a really quick and dirty format kind of thing. And here's an example. You might recognize this guy. So you know who that is, right, Ariel?
Of course I do. He's hanging out in the chat too.
Awesome. Hi, Zach. So here's a guest profile from Motion's podcast, Recorded Content, where Zach was a guest. And so instead of including Zach's whole bio, which could be like 4 paragraphs long and tell us everything that he did from college to now to his aspirations for the future, shorten it. What's his name? What does he do? We've got a hyperlink to his podcast. What's his company? noteworthy, or sometimes what I've seen people do is like a key quote, like what's their defining quote from the episode. And then, we've got a nice headshot there. And here's like a link to his LinkedIn and Twitter and any other socials. So, think about how you can make the guest profile more digestible. And again, thinking of your page as a resource for your listeners, I think they're going to get a lot more value out of this than like 5 paragraphs of text. All right, number 6, include a call to action, which surprisingly, I see a lot of, I very rarely see this on a podcast page, or on an episode page, I should say. So the call to action is, if someone's on your episode page, you have their attention, right? They're interested in your episode. They're checking something out from it. What do you want them to do next? How do you want to stay in touch with them? There should be options on that page for how to do that. So maybe it's follow the podcast, right? We can't say subscribe anymore. So follow on Google, Spotify, Apple. Just have easy links to subscribe. Or you could use a service like pod.link, which is a free service which gives you one link, and then it'll give links to your podcast in all the different apps. And I think there's other similar services. Or with everything that's gone on with Apple over the last couple months, it's kind of a reminder that even if you have a super well listened to podcast or whatever, you don't own the audience on these podcast platforms, right? You are kind of at the whim of what they do. So, I like to push podcasters to directing people to sign up for an email list, because that's really the only way that you have the most control over communicating, with your listeners. You've got their email address, you can get right in their email, in their inbox, but, obviously this will depend on your goals. It's not the worst thing in the world to want to get them to follow or subscribe to the podcast, but just something to think about. I think you always want to be building your email list for the reasons that I just mentioned. I'm just trying to think if I had a good example of I might have one, yeah. So just in terms of, so here's Side Hustle Nation, and in terms of a call to action, so, he's doing like, full-length articles on his episode page. But if you go here, right, this is what I'm talking about, is including something like "Want More Side Hustle Show?" And you've got the links there. Or he could just as easily put, or he's got it here. Yep, if you want to get on his email list. I'm in favor of trying to be simple with the call to action. So, like, just direct people to an email list, or just direct people to subscribe. But obviously, you can have both. And that's, you can test both and see what works. All right, moving on to the next tip. Add an about the podcast section. Now, I would recommend doing this on an episode page, but I would at least say have this somewhere on your podcast website. And what I mean by an about the podcast section is, so again, if someone's on your episode page, you've captured their attention, at least a little bit, right? Like, they're interested in your show. Give them the context. Like, apart from this episode, what's your show about? And the about should convey, like, what's the value proposition of your show? So why should I listen to this podcast? What will it offer me? What will I get out of it? That's kind of the way it should be written, ideally. And I do have an example. So here's from one show, Growth Marketing Toolbox, and he actually puts this at the bottom. So on his episode page, you'll get like, summary of the episode, resources and whatever. And then if you scroll to the bottom of the page, it's got about the podcast and tells you what it is, how often you can get it, and it describes who it's for. So, again, if I somehow landed on that episode page and I'm not subscribing to the podcast, he's made it easy for me to do that, and I know exactly what it's about. The other benefit of having, some language like this, which is like about your show broadly, is it makes it really easy for people to write about your podcast. So, Ariel, for example, is like the podcast newsletter queen, right? And so when she's writing about a show, tell me like something like this, Ariel, doesn't make it a lot easier for you than you having to like dig up the information from different places.
Yeah, I use the descriptions written by podcasters all the time. And I don't want to have to dig for them, or else I might have to make it up, and it's not going to be the best representation of your show.
Exactly, right? And then so the other advantage of that is that it's in your own words. And when you have something, if it's like written decently, it's a lot less likely that someone else is gonna reinvent the wheel and rewrite what you've written. So it also gives you a little bit more control over how your show is written about and talked about. Okay, and then so final tip. How are we doing on time? We're all right. And this is, so rather than a specific thing, this is just something to be thinking about. It's something I'm thinking about a lot, is consider using AI tools to shortcut your show notes writing process. So there's a bunch of different tools out there. I'll be honest, I've tried a few of them and I haven't been wowed by any of them. But the technology is developing really quickly. And I think to build it into your process as a way of coming up with titles or even key takeaways. For example, some of these tools, you can put language that you've written in it, and the AI will come up with a better version of it. So if you don't consider yourself the most polished writer, or, especially with show notes, right? Maybe you're doing it, it's kind of a last minute thing before you're able to publish the podcast. This could be an easy way to help you polish your writing and also make it more appealing to your target audience. So a couple of the AI tools that I know of and that I think are, interesting to follow is Conversion AI, Copy AI, and there's one or two others, but those are kind of the ones that are on my radar. So yeah, thinking about AI. And that is all for today. Hopefully this helped with show notes writing, and I'm happy to jump into questions.
Amazing. Jackie, that was great. My favorite presentations are ones that have very clear takeaways, and having your presentation with just 1 through 8, exactly what to do, is amazing. For the people who are rewatching, hello, first of all, hello from the past. And for the people who are here right now, I recommend rewatching and going through and screenshotting 1 through 8, because those were really, really helpful. And I think can really guide some folks to creating better show notes. So again, Jackie, you're an expert, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Ariel. It was fun. I really like thinking about this stuff in a very dorky way. Happy to take any questions if there are.
All right, we've got a bunch, so let's get through them. Quick one, really quick. What was Conversion.ai for again?
So that's one of the AI tools that I'm aware of. There's many, right? So I would definitely look at Product Hunt. They're all kind of listed there. But Conversion.ai is one AI writing tool that could be helpful when writing your show notes.
Awesome. A question from Leah Jackson. Should you use your episode title as your blog title for marketing purposes?
I love that question. I would definitely say no. But it depends how you are naming your episode title. A lot of people will include numbers in the episode title, or EP 122, and then they have like a certain format, like guest name and company or something like that. So if that's the kind of title you're using, that might work fine for your podcast. But on your show notes page, I would definitely make it more of a blog title. So if your show is about, if your show is about podcasting, and it's, let's say, an episode with Zach, right, from SquadCast, instead of it being like, Zach, of CEO of SquadCast or something like that, I would optimize it for the content and say, so how to record remote interviews, or the best tool for using remote interviews. So I would definitely lean more into a content way of doing it and take an SEO approach to the podcast episode title page.
Awesome. Next question. I love this question. Very quick to the point from Alistair. Do episode numbers matter at all?
Do episode numbers?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious on your take on this, Ariel.
Yeah, I think so. Apple has come out with different guidance on this throughout the years. And if you follow James Cridland, podnews.net, he puts out a daily newsletter. He had some articles about this a few years ago, but basically, I think you can avoid numbers. I think some of the podcast distribution platforms, some of the different podcast listening apps will list them. Some will not list them. Exactly. Randy Wilburn says it depends who you ask. And I think that kind of is the mantra that you can repeat with almost every question in the podcast space. It will matter on some platforms. It will not matter on others. I personally do not use episode numbers. I did for a while. I didn't like what it looked like, and I didn't like that the number would eventually be 1,000, and that's not so pretty. So, you can decide things based on the aesthetics of it as well.
Yeah, I think that is a good answer. I don't have much to add to that. For whatever it's worth, I find I gloss over the numbers. So thinking of myself as a podcast listener, they don't really do anything for me as a listener. But I think internally sometimes they can serve different purposes. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to think about it.
Yeah. From Zach, are there any successful shows who do not use or minimally use show notes?
Definitely. I think Joe Rogan has basically no show notes.
He doesn't have to,
He doesn't have to. So that's why, I wanted to open with that question of what are your show notes for? I think there is this default, I have to have podcast show notes. And then, people are just sort of checking it off a list. But again, I'd go back and just think strategically about them. You can have, and there are definitely examples of show notes or of podcasts that are very successful that have minimal or zero show notes. Even I think This American Life has, certainly in the app, very, very minimal description of their episodes. So it is possible. I think if you're creating a show and community is a big aspect of it, and maybe your show also is part of maybe a paid membership community or something like that, something that comes to mind is the Farnham Street podcast. I think you probably do have to have a little something as a way to engage and, provide more for that community. And then again, we talked about thinking of this in a very SEO centric way. But also if you've just decided I'm just focusing on download numbers and I just really want more visibility in podcast apps and all of that, then I wouldn't be putting a lot of effort into your show notes.
And are there successful show notes who do not? Yeah, I think show notes can be a great resource for potentially just continuing to engage your continuing to engage your listeners. If you want to give them a reason to stick around, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And especially if your podcast is one that is giving information, you probably want it to be something that extends beyond just the one time that they listen to it. So putting something in writing just really lets people continue with the knowledge that you've given them.
Sure.
Question from Rebecca Groves. Can you recommend a resource for learning about how to improve SEO for podcasts?
Yes. So there could be a few different things that you mean by SEO for podcasts. So if we're talking about like SEO, like when I search in Apple or Stitcher, and I search, let's say, tennis, because I'm looking for podcasts about tennis. So to me, that's like podcast SEO. And I'm trying to think what is a good resource for learning about that. I mean, Pacific Content, I think, does have a lot of really excellent content that deals with that topic and a lot of other things, like the technical side of how do you get better visibility in the apps. But if we're talking about SEO more generally and thinking about, optimizing the episode pages on your podcast website, there's a lot. Some of the people that I learned from are Brendan Hufford, and he's got a program called SEO for the Rest of Us, which really is probably one of the most simplest ways of teaching about SEO that I've seen. So he makes it very easy to understand. The other person I follow who has written a bunch about how to optimize your show notes page is Brian Dean from Backlinko.
I hope I'm spelling all these names correctly. I'm trying to put them into the chat.
Brian Dean might be DEAN, and it's Backlinko. Let me see. I'll just drop it in. But yeah, those. I don't know if you would have any to add, Ariel.
SEO people, I'm not too familiar with, but let me see. Off the top of my head, I don't have anybody, but I'll definitely share some resources on Twitter afterwards.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alistair.
Sure.
Next question?
Sure. I'm just, I do have a really relevant article. And it is, here. I've got it here. Okay. Yep. Ready for
Neil
next
Patel.
question. And
Yeah,
I
that's a good
will
one.
drop this into the chat. Yeah. Neil Patel is a good, okay. Here's the Brian Dean article that I was thinking about.
Awesome. Okay, next question is this. From Carla Mowell. My travel podcast, Wyoming, my 307 episode titles are more evocative than informative. For example, my show on responsible recreation is called Wide Open Space. My question is, does that kind of title hurt me in terms of searchability?
Okay, sorry. I lost it a bit there. Let me scroll up.
So her question is, her episode is about responsible recreation, and the episode title was called Wide Open Space. So rather than saying it's about responsible recreation, it's called something that's a little bit more evocative, something that makes you think. So does that hurt Carla's podcast in terms of searchability? Or is it good maybe because it is evocative? It makes you want to click to find out what it's about.
So yeah, I think those are different approaches. It does seem like more of a title that, to your point, Ariel, like it would be like, like responsible recreation. I want to know what that means. So I think it would probably be good at enticing people to listen. So what, in terms of searchability, what would someone be, I don't know if someone would be searching for responsible recreation. I'm not sure what term they would be searching for. But so the article that I dropped in talks about how to do keyword research for a podcast episode. And so if you did want to optimize more for search, you'd probably want to do some keyword research to know what people are looking for, and then make sure that, you know, your episode is easy for them to find. In terms of keyword research, what I would say is you can do it, like you can record your episode and then you can do keyword research after the fact. And that's, you know, people have gotten great results that way. But I think it's definitely a lot easier if you do the keyword research first and use that as part of your content development process. Because then you can basically identify and see, what are people searching for, what are people interested in, and you can make episodes that are tailored towards that, rather than trying to retroactively like line up an episode with a keyword that there might be a lot of interest in, but your episode doesn't really touch on it. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm just going to echo what Matthew McKee said in the chat, that Carla might consider combining the evocative with the term for search. So maybe something like wide open spaces, responsible recreation, or what's the deal with responsible recreation? You know, just having that in there somewhere. Yep. Zach suggests an A/B test. So every other episode could be evocative, and then the other ones could be kind of more of the search terms, if that makes sense, so that you can see which ones potentially rank.
Exactly. And like, you know, one of the things I would say with SEO, like, I don't think the only valid way to make content is to think of it in terms of an SEO framework. There's a lot of good reasons to make content, and sometimes the best content is stuff that people wouldn't even think to search for. So I wouldn't be like, don't hold yourself hostage to SEO and keywords, but it's something to, you know, it's something to consider as you're optimizing and depending on what your goals are.
Absolutely.
What's the trends thing?
The trends that Zach just posted?
Yep.
Zach, do you want to come on the screen and tell us a little bit about that? Let me know if you're available. And because I know that can be a really, really helpful resource. Okay. Next question from Matthew Doles. Are podcasts more often found through their website or in Apple or in podcast apps?
Yeah, so really interesting. I did come across a stat from what's Tom Webster's report?
The Edison Research?
Yeah. So there was a stat from Edison Research, and I wish I could recall it exactly, but it basically showed that most people find podcasts from searching the web, which I was really surprised by, and like, so I don't know like how much, you know, we should take that as you know, like I think there's probably a lot to parse through with that stat, but what I would say is that I think Google search and searching the web is something that podcasters really neglect. They're really focused on, you know, being visible and, you know, trying to rank in an app. And that's really important, you know, and it's important if you're super focused on download numbers, especially if you're wanting to get sponsorship and do ads, right? But, you know, what I'd say is just think about, you know, Google search and don't neglect it. You know, the other reason that I like search as a way to find podcasts is podcast search and podcast SEO is a lot newer. You know, typical Google search that relies on text is something that's been around like for 25 years before podcasts. And we know how it works, and we know like, you know, how to optimize it. And there's, you know, thousands of people searching for things every second, including for podcasts. So it's something to think about.
Awesome. Hey, Zach, welcome to the stage.
What's up? Great job. This has been awesome.
Thank you. Yeah,
so,
I'm having fun.
Zach, just quickly introduce yourself. Who are you? And then I would love for you to talk about the link that I just reshared in the chat.
I'm the random person from the chat that just jumped in here.
Totally, yeah.
I'm the co-founder and CEO of SquadCast and have the pleasure of working with you both, and a lot of people in the chat with SquadCast, and show notes came up in our community as like one of the main areas of improvement that people felt like they could make to their show, make improvements to, and yeah, so much knowledge and wisdom shared in today's presentation. So I threw in there. You mentioned keyword research, and that being something you kind of do proactively to inform the question asked about, evocative versus clear. I love all the suggestions of combining them, doing a test of, what people click on versus don't, or researching up front if like you're really, really trying to optimize for growth. But
yep,
there's a lot of search engines to choose from, and they all work differently. So
yes,
Google, of course, YouTube that's number one and number two of the biggest search engines. Also, Google Podcasts has been evolving, and
yes,
whether you're providing a transcript or not, I think they're transcribing everything, similar to I think Castbox actually pioneered that technology. And Renee being a former Googler, I think that's really awesome to see that being more and more available to people. So there's certainly accessibility, like you mentioned, Jackie. That's a big reason to include the transcripts yourself, and that helps with SEO. But I think focusing on a channel. There's so many different search engines to try to optimize for.
yes,
Just pick one to start with, and those seem like good ones to start with. Of course, Spotify and Apple are the two bigger ones when it comes to podcasts specifically. But less is known about how those search algorithms work.
right.
All right. So Zach, stay up here. We've just got a few minutes left. We'll get another question in, and then you'll help us say goodbye.
Cool.
All right. So Luca asked, why can't you say follow? I think he meant subscribe. Jackie, you mentioned a little bit earlier. I answered in the chat, but I'm wondering if you want to add anything to it. So I said, you can say follow and subscribe. You can say whatever you want in your call to action at the end of a podcast or in your show notes. But Apple recently changed their call to action from subscribe to follow, because follow implies free and subscribe implies a paid, because Apple, of course, recently unveiled their subscription service. So Jackie, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, that's I was just kind of poking fun at Apple, really. And like also for whatever it's worth, so I'm an Android user, but I'm also very heavily in the podcast world, and I just get very frustrated how Apple has kind of monopolized things, and everything kind of defaults to Apple, and so when someone shares a link, and they share a link to their podcast episode and it's Apple, like a little part of me cries inside, because I'm just like, that there are, especially outside the US, there are a lot of people that are using, and increasingly, I think, Spotify obviously is aggressively trying to get people to use their platform, and there's a lot of people that use Google Podcasts. So I was just having a little dig at Apple, but you should use the terminology that you feel most comfortable with. And I guess what they were trying to do is subscribe. I think you made this point, Ariel, is typically a term that's thought of where there's money exchange, but they're trying to emphasize that listening to podcasts and all this content is free. So and I think that's a worthwhile distinction.
Yeah.
Spotify also has follow, and to your point, Jackie, if you're trying to optimize for growth, choosing the largest population available is actually Android. In the United States, it's reverse, but the rest of the world, it's clearly Android that is the biggest opportunity to connect with people. So either Apple should make an Android Apple Podcast app. Hot take. I'm gonna throw that out there. So hope you're in the audience.
I like it. Although let's hope the rollout is better.
Oh, sure.
than some recent other stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we are right now at 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock Pacific. So we are unfortunately out of time. We do have a few unanswered questions in the question tab. So what we can do afterwards, folks who did not get their questions answered, is we can type out the answers. Jackie, if you're willing to do that, that would be lovely. So with that, Jackie, I'm going to give you a chance to maybe wrap it up, and then I'll wrap up from the SquadCast end. Any parting words?
Sure, yeah. And I'm curious, DR Faye said amen sister. I wondered if that was for me and what comment that was.
It was about Apple. It was
Apple.
about Apple.
Oh, okay. I knew that I would have some people out there who would feel that.
Yeah.
Anyways, no, just to wrap up, thanks everyone for your time. I hope this was helpful. Please feel free to email me directly if you have any questions, want to chat further on any of this. My email is jacqueline@podreacher.com. And otherwise check us out, podreacher.com. And hopefully we will be back. I'd love to do this again. So thanks for the opportunity, Ariel and Zach.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Really great to work with you on our blog post for SquadCast. If you want to find more of that and read some of the blog posts that Jackie and her team have put together, you can go to squadcast.fm/blog. I'll put it into the chat. And Zach, anything to say before I say goodbye?
Just really great webinar, and have a great Friday, everybody. Thank you, Jackie and Ariel, for a great presentation today. And we'll see everybody later. Thank you.
Yeah. Glad to have everybody here. If you need more information from us, you can follow us all over social media, SquadCast FM, SquadCast.fm. I am behind all of the social channels, so if you send me a DM, make sure it's nice because I do have feelings. And with that, I hope to see you at Podcast Movement. And until then, on the internet. Have a great day and happy weekend, everybody.